Survival horror is back again. Biohazard suits, the masks, contaminated zones, crawling with these monsters. It's one of my favorite subjects, and honestly, it's underrepresented in my body of work. So, I want to fix that. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate some of my key strategies for iterating on character designs. A lot of student work that I see looks fine. Some I'd even say is great. Very technically solid work, but it feels underserved in a way. A lot of people simply commit too soon, or they just don't explore quite far enough. So if you ever designed something and may have thought, yeah, this kind of works, but it doesn't feel special enough or it's not there yet, this is what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to design the same biohazard worker 3 different times, but I'm going to aim for 3 different levels of thinking with each iteration. We're going to have the safe version, that weird push, and that bold, fully committed direction. So, it's going to be fun. Let's hang out for a bit. It's a great week. Resident Evil 9 just released, so I'm going to be playing this, and we're going to come up with some designs inspired by the series. We'll even examine a bit how the Resident Evil series itself has handled these kind of designs very well for over 3 decades. So up to this point, you've probably already seen me block in some of my initial thumbnails here. And at this stage, I'm simply testing mass relationships and shape hierarchy. These are critical for any character design. What dominates this silhouette? What reads first? These are the questions that I'm asking myself. And then from here, I'm going to choose those 3 directions from this whole pool of silhouettes. So let's see what changes when the constraints do stay the same, but the thinking kind of evolves in each. And before we get into the specifics of those, let's just talk a little bit about functional character design. Character design is constraint-driven problem solving, right? Every version of Leon reflects the limitations, the responsibilities, and expectations of his role at that specific time in the series. In Resident Evil 2, Leon's silhouette mostly prioritizes official gear over any kind of personal identity, visually speaking. Now, he reads as young, and he's defined by that police system, the RPD. I love how care was taken to show numerous wounds that reflect his inexperience that he accumulates over the course of that game. And then Resident Evil 4, he's operating independently as a government agent, and that uniform disappears and it's replaced with that low-profile tactical gear. There's less branding and more function, and that silhouette does tighten up a bit as he's not backed by that system anymore. He becomes the authority. And then we have Resident Evil 6 here. That design hardens, you got a bit of a darker palette, those streamlined layers, and everything about it is very efficient. The constraint is his experience now. Everything is purposeful. He's aggressive, but elegant in doing so. It's a great contrast. And then in Resident Evil 9, the design is more restrained and minimal, emphasizing maturity and mastery over a huge amount of tactical bulk. He's basically John Wick now in this game. But across all versions, the logic remains simple. Role defines the constraint defines the form, that form defines our perception, and this is character design. As artists, we have to take responsibility for our own growth. If we're not learning, we are falling behind. That's why I'm excited to say that Skillshare is sponsoring today's video. There's a class I genuinely recommend checking out. Concept Art Character Design by my good friend Hardy Fowler. I've mentioned Hardy's courses before on this channel, and many of you probably already follow him on social media, but I want to highlight this specific class on Skillshare because it is absolutely excellent. Hardy is currently working as a character designer in the games industry. He's been doing this professionally for over a decade. He knows what actually matters, at a production level, something I talk about a lot on this channel. This course is about leveling up, and that's the key in a competitive industry. There are a lot of good artists, but clients pay the artists who really stand out. If you're not familiar with Skillshare, it's an online learning community with thousands of creative classes taught by working professionals. So whether you're just starting out or trying to push to a higher level of the industry, they offered structured learning paths across a wide range of creative disciplines. One thing I really like is that many of the classes are project-based. So you're not just watching these videos, you're building real work. So by the end of Hardy's course, you have finished character pieces that you can actually refine and potentially use in your actual portfolio. So beyond character design, you can explore awesome topics like illustration, drawing, and digital painting, whatever skill you're looking to sharpen next. And right now, the first 500 people that use my link in the description get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. That means you could take Hardy's class, make real progress over the next 30 days, essentially for free with zero risk. Huge thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out Hardy's class specifically, I will have a link down below as well. So now with this first design, my goal is to design something a bit more generic. I'm not designing a hero character, maybe a sub-boss at most with these designs, but the same logic is going to apply. So specifically with the safe version here, I'm focusing on logic and readability. The tank placement is centered, it's mounted, it's well referenced, it's high on the back, right? It has good weight distribution, and it makes for the silhouette very easy to understand. The mask, though I have it down so we can see his face, it's a standard sort of respirator, right? Very clean function. The goal here is to avoid confusion on a first kind of design like this. You immediately understand what this guy's job is and potentially the environment he might need to go into. The design is a lot more symmetrical as a result. You get the harnesses, the hoses, the tank, and it's pretty evenly distributed. I like to add a little bit of asymmetry when I can, but my goal first and foremost is for it to be grounded and believable. Proportions are expected. It's bulky, but human. It's heavy and it's manageable, right? Nothing extremely exaggerated yet. The gear is routing, it is very practical, and I tried to make the hose connect as logically as possible with this so that nothing does feel too decorative. So what works? It's readable, and at thumbnail size, you know that this is a hazard waste worker. And the symbols that we can add onto his suit can reinforce that theme, and that gear supports the role. But this is a generic design through and through. It doesn't challenge any kind of expectations. Sometimes that's exactly what we want, and it does follow real-world logic, and it stays within very familiar and expected proportions. This kind of design would pass production without any kind of friction, especially if we're designing an NPC-like character. But it's also the kind that doesn't push yet into something more memorable, something that I want to fill my portfolio with, and something that has a bit more intention in there, more storytelling, more visual acting with the design itself. But this is the foundation, before we start breaking it. And I do feel from the series, Claire Redfield is a very great example of how a reserved, grounded design can still be highly effective. Her silhouette is very practical, right? Nothing extraordinary, and her clothing, and then some versions are very dated, is very realistic. She fits a survival horror tone without any over-the-top exaggeration. And I think for me, that's what makes her iconic. It isn't flash. It's clarity, it's consistency, it's present. She looks great doing what she does. Nothing is pushed. There's no agendas behind her role. It just works. Her red jacket and confident posture carry the design. And sometimes restraint works. But now, moving into the second one, let's see what happens when we begin to push this. Yeah, so now on iteration 2 here, the weird push. This is a fun one, but weird, it doesn't mean random. That's not what I mean here at all. It really means a constraint that is just pushed, thinking outside the box. The core idea is still essentially the same, a hazmat worker with that survival horror tone. So I'm not really affecting too much here. I'm changing the emphasis in a way. So now with this version, the proportions have changed. The tank itself now dominates. It's oversized, it's looming, I'd even say it's almost oppressive, and that hose begins to feel like, a bit more anatomical instead of mechanical. And that is really just the subtle elephant reference that I did for fun, like that trunk-like routing, that heavy back mass, and that implied sense of visual weight to it. It's structural, but not too literal. And survival horror thrives on discomfort. So instead of that clean practicality here, I'm really just aiming to push unease. And my goal with this, of course, is to really just push a little bit of that subtle storytelling so that the sludge reads less like waste and it really become an obsession for this character. He doesn't just work in it, he's been shaped by it over time through that prolonged sense of exposure. It's affecting him mentally. And so in this case, weird equals a constraint absolutely maxed out. If I just added random asymmetry to him or just tried to make him look like an elephant, I think the design would break. But if I just adjust these basic proportions, the silhouette weight and that psychological undertone of it, but keeping the functional system there, it's going to stay grounded. This could be definitely a bit of a sub-boss for the Resident Evil series. Iteration isn't just about changing the costume, it's about changing how we're approaching it. That last version we did is purely functional based. This is still about function, but it has a different angle altogether. Thinking outside the box on scenarios like this is a great way to keep pushing designs. And this is an example of how I like to take a design to the very edge without it falling apart. Often enough, that is the sweet spot for like a really good design. Now, Ramon Salazar from Resident Evil 4 is a really great, strong example of this kind of effective weird, I would say. Well, every design in that game is weird, essentially, but his exaggeration is an intentional and it's pretty cohesive, honestly. He's got like these weird, kind of like childlike proportions and that sort of aristocrat like costume and his whole little theatrical sort of posture. It just feels wrong, in so many ways. But then when you really look at it, every element supports that gothic, decaying sort of nobility theme from that section of the game. So again, it's not random strangeness, it's controlled distortion in a very layered sort of way. Tone, hierarchy, memorability, all reinforced together. So now let's skip ahead here and get into the bold iteration. And bold doesn't mean chaos, not by any sense of the word. For me, I like to think of it as just confident, right? This is like a really confident idea. So even though with my design, this is probably the closest to a Resident Evil homage, I love it. I just needed an excuse to draw a monster arm guy this week. But I'm still clearly in this biohazard territory, right? The color blocking, the hazard symbols, that sealed suit, it's all gonna anchor it. But what I'm pushing here is that slight nod to like a near future level of tech where everything's a bit more engineered, at least at a glance. And I'm exploring the physical consequences of exposure to this particular character. So here's kind of like the design test, why I think a lot of these Resident Evil kind of characters work. Do they read at 10 feet? Can you look at them across the room and at a distance? This is having the character be understandable without any texture, without any details. And that is always about the dominant sort of shape design and the masses that go with that. So for me, this is an easy one. The mutated arm just reads, and that's its one visual hook. I could probably go a lot further, but then I would just be plagiarizing the game even further because the ones in the game are fantastic. Look at the giant eyes, the big claws, but you can still tell the silhouette, or by the silhouette here, that something went wrong. And that becomes the defining shape language here. With this character, also hierarchy is big important, right? So the big read, like I said, is that mutated arm. The medium read is the armored hazmat suit that does have some tears, that it's leaking fluids, like everything. He's barely patched himself together. Obviously, he's failed. But nothing's going to compete with that arm, and that's intentional. And with any good character in this kind of series, you'd want to push the whole silhouette just to black and see if it's understandable from the next character. With this, I get to lean into asymmetry really, really hard, and again, it's not random. I am trying to control it here. And contrast is always the story. One side of him is a little more structured and engineered, and one side is altered. I know it's not insanely original, but it's usable, it's readable, and I do think it's confident enough. And that's because bold doesn't mean complicated here. Bold means the idea survives that distance, right? It survives any kind of simplification, but it still feels purposeful, right? And so look at some bold examples, some of my favorite designs from the series, right? Lady Dimitrescu, right? Her bold design, that extreme, she's like a 9-foot vampire lady, but has a very elegant silhouette. And she just creates that immediate present, right? Through restraint, any scene she's in. And then we've got the old school, the OG one, like Nemesis, right? He's bold, he's got a massive trench coat, he's got a freaking bazooka. You can't mistake him for anything else. And just to go even further back to 96, shout out if you were there, but the old Tyrant, the T-002, it's bold because of that, that exaggerated musculature and that exposed heart. You could just literally see his heart beating on the exterior. He's a perfect bioweapon design. But yeah, if it's not clear though, fundamentals always do matter. They're always going to be at the base. They're always what's going to be in demand for this kind of work. But iteration is what reveals the better solution. And for me, I always just keep the process very simple. I go safe, I try to push it, and then try to commit. So I find by establishing control first, then I like to test the edges with it. And then you can, if you're following along and can do this with your own designs, you can choose very decisively from that. And a lot of artists tend to think that, often enough, I just need more fundamentals. But sometimes they just really need a few more passes, a few more iterations of that one big push, or a few subtle refinements will go a long way off that core idea. And sometimes that really just means having more willingness to push that idea before committing. Confidence doesn't come, from knowing more textbook theory when it comes to art and design. It comes from seeing that design, your design, survive numerous sort of iterations and then choosing that strongest version for a particular reason. So whether it's survival horror, fantasy, or anything else, this process doesn't change. And this is a good place to just say, we did a little mini challenge with this. I provided a very specific brief with very specific sets of instructions, and a few folks over on the Brush Sauce Patreon contributed. And I think these are wonderful designs. We all kind of were hustling and growing through this together, throughout the week. And, everybody, of course, got them to different levels, but I think these are super fun. It got everybody working, got everybody thinking, and we just had a lot of fun with this theme. So you guys will have to let us know below if any of these are your favorite. I think these are absolutely super creative. And in my experience, the strongest ideas rarely are those first ones. They are the ones that communicated the most clearly, through that intention. And that just requires lots of iteration. So let me know, your favorite Resident Evil game and your character down below in the comments. I'd love to hear. And of course, a huge thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Check that link in the description. Take Artie's class for free. It's fantastic. But until then, I'll catch you in the next time. And I gotta get back to trying out some more Resident Evil 9. Peace, guys.